Hey everybody, in this video, I wanted to talk about my thesis. I hope that you enjoyed the video. Leave any comments down below of any suggestions or feedback you have. And after all is said and done, I hope that at the end, you're able to take some inspiration from this or possibly take away anything that will help you create your work. Okay, so let's just jump right in. The name of my thesis was The Capacity of a Line. My name's Christopher Princeton. I created this in 2021 with my instructor being Perry Culper. So this is the table of contents for my thesis, starting with introduction, then we'll look at entourage, then some preliminary mappings I made, some interventions, some drawings, a short film, which unfortunately has some music in it that I can't post to YouTube. I used it in an educational setting, so it was okay at the time, but I can't post that to YouTube. And then applicable in applied situations. All right, so let's start with the introduction. So this is going to be the most talking that I'm going to do throughout the whole video, so if you're just here to see some images, go ahead and skip ahead. But I think what's most important with thesis is having a strong foundation on which to build your thesis upon. Meaning you need a really good concept. What do you want to do as an architect or as a designer? And most importantly, what do you feel like is an important subject within architecture or around architecture that you want to touch on and learn about? In 1938, the Homeowners Loan Corporation carved a line around over 60% of Macon, Georgia on a map. They colored it red and gave it a D, and that's the worst classification possible. The red line marked a hazardous place to underwrite mortgages and was based on the false belief that neighborhoods with black residents would undermine local property values. Lines just like this were carved across all major cities in the United States. Regrettably, the line forever codified patterns of racial segregation and disparities in access to housing, credit, and wealth accumulation for the next 90 plus years. These lines on a map alone did not single-handedly create the segregated cities we live in today, although they did play a very pivotal role. Ultimately, this thesis aspires to develop a series of cartographic explorations and spatial interventions situated within a reimagined Macon, Georgia in the year 1938. This is 1 year prior to its redlining. These mappings and spatial responses will act as a testbed on which to form a probative analysis on the moral integrity and agency of designers, architects, planners, policymakers, legislators, and all other quote-unquote cartographers. By interrogating a line's capacity to manipulate and change the world around us, we can derive deep principles that empower us to identify and draw lines from commonalities and regions that foster unity and equality. The entourage is a mind map that I created on a Mura board, and it's an accumulation of a whole bunch of different designers, images, models, books, concepts, theories, history, everything combined into one, which over time I filtered through it and it slowly became what is now my thesis. The entourage is a mind map of working references, innocent bystanders, and literature that have had a significant influence on the thesis. So, of course, The Color of Law, Infinite Cities by Rebecca Solnit, Collage City, and lastly, The Art of Community. I use mappings and this thesis as a tool to better understand the context of whichever region I was exploring. In this case, it was Miami and Macon, Georgia. In the end, I settled on Macon, Georgia. The intent was to identify divisive lines that are usually hidden from our everyday lives. After studying the divisive lines, I then chose to bring to the front commonalities between people that are usually hidden, ignored, or suppressed. With these mappings, I was trying to discover typologies, characters, and trends, and urban artifacts within Macon, Georgia. To do this, I use things like pamphlets, maps, and historical documentation. I started to develop a lexicon or some type of language that I use to communicate my thesis through imagery. Capitalizing on commonalities within a divided region is a starting point for me to generate spatial interventions so that I can start to reimagine how regions can someday be united. Each of these principles, from The Art of Community by Charles Vogel, they're represented by interventions. These interventions embody the act of unification within a reimagined Macon, Georgia, 1937. So this is where I give quick silhouettes of the 7 interventions: the boundary principle, rituals principle, temple principle, inner rings principle, symbols, initiation, and stories principles are all represented by different interventions. So every page of this booklet has an explanation on the left and right hand side. I would recommend pausing the video and reading those. The following plates we're going to look at are a closer dive into the 7 interventions. The first one on the screen is the flying forum, and this is based on the boundary principle. A common vision within a community not only creates the community itself, but it also solidifies it and makes it stronger. The flying forum is a lightweight flying vessel floating 15,000 feet above the city. It is a gathering space for community members to overlook their city and see the context from a new angle. It can be reached from skylifts that are strategically placed around the city at locations that are easily accessible by everybody. It's programmed with a public forum, a history museum, a radio transmitter, and most importantly, city planning offices. These are all aspects that present past, present, and future growth of the city and its citizens. It can be reached from skylifts placed strategically throughout the city at locations easily accessible by everybody. It is programmed with a public forum, a history museum, a radio transmitter, and city planning offices. These are all aspects that represent past, present, and future growth of the city and its citizens. The next intervention is the AntiWall, and this is based on the ritual principle. Typically, a wall only creates security for one side. The AntiWall is a vertical structure that can create security and a sense of belonging at the same time for both sides. The AntiWall is built along the exposed dividing lines between segregated neighborhoods. These are most prominent around the red line districts. The AntiWall is a semi-transparent material in which community members can etch into the wall their wishes for the past, present, and future of the city. Essentially, the AntiWall acts as a permanent archive of the community's vision and history. To put simply, a temple is a space to worship or perform rituals, and it can be many scales ranging from a large structure to a small 2.5 by 4 foot prayer mat. The temple is a dynamic and moving instrument that should change as the community changes. This intervention is a mobilized structure that migrates across the AntiWall intervention and circumnavigates the city throughout its diverse neighborhoods. As it passes over the AntiWall, it collects values that have been etched into the wall and processes them, then turns them into proposed legislature or petitions. The petitioner is based on the inner rings principle. Unfortunately, countless citizens don't have the capability for their voice to be considered or even heard. And then more often than not, people find it difficult to engage with local policy. This being said, legislature should also be transparent and accessible to everybody, regardless of race, religion, and gender. The petitioner receives the proposed legislature and petitions from the temple, the previous intervention, and transports it throughout the city. It provides a space for people to review, process, and sign petitions. As it moves throughout the city, it marks the ground, drawing a continuous red line representing the act of connecting people rather than dividing them. The token is based on the symbols principle. Seeing the city through someone else's perspective is a powerful way in which to create a bond and a sense of understanding and empathy. The token is a viewing apparatus given to the citizens of Macon. It's a kit of parts that's assembled and then worn. You're also given a set of tools to create your own unique lens. They can be patterns, drawings, photographs, memories, or any other form of self-expression. These lenses can then be traded with others like baseball cards, allowing them to see the city through someone else's lens. The threshold intervention is based on the initiations principle. A community is usually maintained by either a formal or an informal threshold. Brian Franz states that thresholds are transitional spaces, like the bottom of a garden, existing in the boundary between cultivation and wilderness. The threshold is a series of cairns located at the boundary of the city along 4 primary roads. As the city breathes in and then expands, a new threshold is placed every quarter mile. This indexes a palimpsest of lights over time. And last but not least is the podium. The podium intervention is based on the stories principle. Protest is a perfect example of peaceful means of negotiation and self-expression. More importantly, a need for protest shapes our public realm and vice versa. The podium is a platform that a protester can use to be seen and heard by an audience. It's a large, mobilized structure. If the speaker's words are admired and grows a crowd, they can then push them around the city. This gives the average citizen a powerful voice and represents a movement through a joined effort. It takes a podium out from underneath the long-winded politician and places it under the common citizen where it belongs. And that's it for the interventions, and now moving into some of the bigger drawings that I did. So this is a view from the flying forum observation deck of the citizens looking out over their city. You can see the transportation cart zipping around overhead. It's transporting people to and from the forums and throughout the city. In the distance, you see a temple and the podiums at street level. This drawing represents two opposing views that are casting a shadow on the city as two podiums meet at an intersection in downtown Macon. The petition production takes place in 3 stages. First, a community member places their values into the AntiWall. Second, the temple receives and processes these values and turns them into petitions and proposed legislature. And lastly, the proposed legislature and petitions are received by the petitioner, where community members can sign them as it moves around the city. And finally, this is a view of the AntiWall. It displays a wall, which is usually a divisive line, but the AntiWall flips this idea on its head. The AntiWall is created on the border of segregated districts and brings people together through the sharing of values. Its material is permeable, which lets people and traffic to move through it. So in conclusion, it's my intention that these ideas and representations shown in this thesis can help us identify divisive lines and then empower us to identify and draw lines from commonalities in regions that foster unity and equality. If you like the design of this thesis, check out the template that I posted in the description below. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you liked the video, please like the video and subscribe down below if you want to see future content just like this. So check out those 2 videos over there. They have a lot of really digestible information about architecture. And right beside the videos is my patrons from Patreon. That's where creative makers and thinkers like yourself can support somebody like me. And in the end, you get a lot of cool exclusive downloads and benefits. Regardless though, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.